This video is based on Chapter 9 of my new book, Godmindfamily, The Human Mind, Behaviour, Symptoms, the Family, Society, Politics, and God's Kingdom Explained. It's available free on my website, robertensor.com, spelled ENSOR, and you can also buy it from Amazon in ebook and paperback formats via the links in the description below. So the current education system in the Western world is broken. It's intended to churn out obedient, conformist, barely literate, and numerate bureaucrats and employees with a scientifically materialistic and politically liberal worldview who won't rock the boat or challenge the system. Much of modern Western education relies on rote learning, rewarding parrot-like repetition of facts provided by an authority figure, the teacher, to condition obedience and crush critical thinking and independent thought. This wouldn't be so bad if the facts and arguments taught in the schools were mostly true, but they aren't. The curriculum's biases are colored by the scientific materialist worldview in the sciences and by politically correct ideology in the humanities and social sciences, both of which are basically false, flawed, and harmful philosophies, as evinced by the way Western societies have declined to the extent they have adopted these beliefs. The dumbing down process is now becoming painfully obvious even under the thin veil of grade inflation, as demonstrated by falling IQ scores in developed nations, as well as reduced reading comprehension and mathematical skills in school children and college students. Partly this dumbing down effect is due to young people's attention spans being reduced by social media and the internet. AI, artificial intelligence, is doubtless having an even worse effect, almost removing the burden of thought altogether and making homework and coursework into a bit of a sham. Making things easier and simpler and lowering the bar for pass grades virtually guarantees that students on average aren't going to get any smarter at best. The one thing school does successfully is produce conformists who tend to obey authority figures and want to fit in with their peers out of the fear of being thought weird or abnormal. School is designed to crush the human spirit and individuality before it even reaches adulthood, and it is largely succeeding because most people are no match for the system. This applies to both state comprehensive schools and private schools, though the latter are engineered to produce slightly better educated, more driven conformists in order to furnish a tame ruling class preoccupied with competing over empty trophies. The fact education is compulsory in most Western nations demonstrates how vital it is for the state to maintain control. Mandatory uniforms in certain schools throughout the world are blatant attempts to instill obedience and conformity. The deceivers encourage the dumbing down of children in schools and universities and the infiltration of ideology into the curriculum and the universities by the minds of the relevant parties, who nonetheless bear responsibility for their actions. Aside from ideological bias, many degrees in the Western world, especially the UK and the US, are pointless in that they do not provide vocational skills or lead directly and reliably to a career. This includes most of the humanities and social sciences. Tony Blair and Gordon Brown's new Labour government encouraged up to 50% of school leavers to attend university, goal achieved in 2017-18, which has produced a glut of unemployed, overeducated young people who feel they are overqualified for menial, low-skilled jobs. Many American graduates are in a similar boat, except they paid even more for their tuition. And so we have the bizarre phenomenon of the Oxbridge alumni barista, a sure sign of a dysfunctional society that misallocates resources and human capital. Increasingly, employers in the Western world are realizing these degree certificates aren't worth the paper they're printed on, but many have yet to get the memo. At least vocational degrees, law, medicine, psychology, financial accounting, etc., can lead directly to high-paying jobs, but there are serious biases and flaws in the way that virtually every field is taught, which must be more or less agreed with by students if they want to receive their degrees. This means that you end up with an army of professionals who have been selected for their ability to submit to groupthink and regurgitate a slew of falsehoods or half-truths on cue. The degree requirement for these kinds of jobs weeds out many who are incompetent for sure, but it also excludes original thinkers, which admittedly are somewhat thin on the ground these days. So now we move on to finance and economics. Mainstream economic theory is largely based on abstract mathematical models that bear little resemblance to reality, have no concept of history, and take human rationality as a predicate. Humans are fundamentally irrational, and the economy obviously changes over time based on causes that lie in the past. The practice of economics is actually largely dictated by central banking because central banks control the money supply in an economy. They print the money, or increasingly issue the currency digitally, and set the interest rates, determining the availability of loans from commercial lenders. Some central banks, despite masquerading as governmental institutions, are actually privately owned, typically by large commercial banks. Whilst with so much government spending in the US, 14.8%, often more than the defense budget, which is huge, go on repaying the interest on loans, most of which are from the nation's central bank. Why would the government waste money on repaying itself? The answer is that the Federal Reserve is a private concern. This is why the central bank's independence is touted as some important social benefit that must be preserved. The existence of the Federal Reserve means that every dollar issued in the US has to be repaid by the US federal government, plus interest. In exchange, all the Federal Reserve has to do is cover its relatively modest costs, offices, vault, security guard, computers, paper and printing costs, etc. No wonder the US government has frequent shutdowns due to lack of funding. Japan, Switzerland, South Africa, Belgium, Italy, Greece, Turkey, and San Marino all have central banks that are at least partly privately owned. The economy is driven by people's beliefs. If they believe they need something, they will buy it. If they believe a stock will rise, they will buy it. A classic example of the self-fulfilling prophecy is when a large investor believes a recession is around the corner and sells his stock. This can and has led to actual economic depressions as share prices plummet and increasing numbers of people sell their stocks because they believe the economy is going down the drain. Banks have created recessions, intentionally or otherwise, by undermining public confidence in the economy countless times, most notably during the crisis in 1929 that sparked the Great Depression. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates too sharply in response to Black Thursday, which worsened the panic. Of course, after a market crash is the perfect time to buy stocks at rock bottom prices, in the knowledge that many stocks will tend to rise in value again over time. The boom-bust cycle that has characterized the economic history of the last 100 years is therefore the most potentially profitable for investors, and it is fueled by groupthink, greed, fear, and self-fulfilling prophecies. The media has consistently played a role in causing or exacerbating economic depressions by broadcasting hysterical doom and gloom headlines that feed the financial panic and engaging in overly optimistic reportage of rising share prices and the growth of certain companies and sectors, notably tech, in the dot-com bubble and more recently. The herd instinct is also a large driver of financial panics in which investors withdraw their deposits and sell poorly performing stocks en masse. There is an amazing phenomenon that I call the nonsense economy, whereby a large chunk of Western nations' GDP, especially in the UK, is dependent on falsehood, to the point that if most people in those economies stop believing those falsehoods, the economy would temporarily suffer to a significant degree, probably going into recession. Of course, in the long run, it would be beneficial to cease squandering money and resources that could be better allocated elsewhere. There would nonetheless be a painful adjustment period. Many Western countries had stronger economies when they had more factories and trade surpluses. But Western manufacturing has been severely curtailed by excessive labor and environmental regulations, and after decades of offshoring key infrastructure, onshoring would be a lengthy process. Wars are tremendously profitable to banks, the armaments industry, and other corporations. For example, the Second Gulf War was obviously about obtaining private commercial access to the oil in Iraq and selling armaments to participating governments. The longer a war goes on for, the more profits are generated for defense contractors. It has even been admitted that the rationale for invading Iraq, the supposed WMD threat, was false. Capitalism in its early stages certainly helped to build the conveniences we have today through its incentive structure. Whether or not that was a good thing, the free market was effective as a form of economic Darwinism, generally allowing good companies that deliver value to thrive and the worst to go bankrupt. That is no longer the case. Meritocracy has largely departed from the world economy. Even in its heyday, there was an element of robber barons muscling out competitors with aggressive and even illegal business tactics, but there was at least a competition for resources. Over time, power and wealth has concentrated in fewer hands, leading to the creation of a financial elite who have pulled up the social ladder behind them and resorted to cartelism. Karl Marx's theories have been incredibly destructive and led to the deaths of countless millions, but he was right about the principle of infinite accumulation, whereby surplus profits are reinvested, leading to increasing capital accumulation in the hands of the wealthy few. The result is massive and widening wealth inequality, super rich individuals who can afford tax lawyers to help them find the loopholes deliberately embedded in complex tax codes, and the formation of monopolies and oligopolies that don't have to care about delivering value. Competition can afford to comply with onerous government regulations. Late capitalism has become as non-competitive as state socialism. The concentration of wealth in the hands of the super rich has led to disproportionate political power being wielded by the wealthiest via donations to political parties, super PACs, revolving doors, and intelligence gathering and blackmail traps, as evinced by Epstein's operation on his island. All of these factors are driven by greed and fear.